Thank you very much, dear friends Fedorovich, Sergei Alexandrovich, and I am delighted to participate in the meeting of the Foreign and Defense Policy Committee again. Leaders will ask. This respected body is not surprised that I yearn for you every year. It's not an obligation, it's a pleasure to check the clock and tell us what our thinkers are going in. My job is to listen to the ideas that are constantly emerging in our expert society, especially within the framework of freedom. We're in a state of becoming. This is a new internal political cycle. After the presidential election, our people once again gave President Putin a high degree of trust in his line, including in foreign affairs. Of course, this has a lot to do with our ministry. We are working on the steps needed to further implement the Russian foreign policy concept approved last March. But in general, I would like to emphasize immediately that the continuity of our foreign policy will be ensured, including the main objectives, tasks, and priorities of our work. We are in a difficult situation which cannot be explained in more detail. The West, led by the United States, has not abandoned its declared goal of strategic failure against Russia, including at the theoretical level. In addition, failures, including military failures, but not just our country's existence itself, are seen by many of the most aggressive Russophobes as a threat to global dominance led by the Golden Billion. Of course, with Washington, we, like everyone here, have watched what Western think tanks are doing, how they are doing in situations that do us the most damage, and have called for the supply of more and more new weapons. Kyiv has been officially allowed to attack anyone at the level of members of the government. Parts of Russian territory at least say that Kiev's latest statements on the matter, including Secretary of State Blumkin, are well known. But of course, they also ask their governments to decide here. These hawks are asking their governments to invest more. The military-industrial complex, the so-called Russian decolonization, fantasizes about putting the economy on the military track. If we say it in Russian, it's about dismembering ours. It is difficult for our country to understand who is making whom. Sometimes political scientists, politicians, or vice versa. On May 2nd, the London House of Counties Conference was recently organized to focus on the confiscation of Russian assets frozen in the West. Then he asked Canadian Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland how she was foreign minister, and we were with her more than once. We communicated in her capacity and promoted her at this meeting. Now there is a chaotic argument about taking money. A politically and morally justified step necessary to save Ukraine and maintain a rules-based order. They said it was important to set a precedent, as she said, when the aggressor paid in the same context, and referred to the discussion on the disintegration of Russia held at the James Tallinn Foundation on April 25th, where activists from the so-called Free People's Forum spoke publicly about Russia. Under the care of the United States, the way in which this discussion is carried out shows that the sharp stage of military and political confrontation with the West is still going on and is in. If so, it can be said that it is in full swing. We have seen a special enthusiasm for anti-Russian rhetoric, and we have seen a special enthusiasm among our European neighbors. I think everyone heard Macron's statement, Cameron's statement. Others are talking about the inevitable war with Russia, and I am. I remember Dmitry Vitalyevich Trenin, who appeared here in one of his articles, writing that Europe as a partner has nothing to do with us for at least a generation. I can't help but agree that we feel it almost every day in practice. It must be admitted that many facts support this prediction, not only in our feelings, but also in our opinion. After the failure of the notorious counteroffensive of the Ukrainian armed forces, the West began to promote a new, blatantly false argument that Putin would not stop in Ukraine if they had said earlier before our special military operation began. Let's accept Ukraine into NATO as soon as possible, and Putin will not dare to realize his plan for this country. That is to say, they assume that NATO membership is sacred, and Russia will never commit crimes against this sacred. Now, the rhetoric is diametrically opposite. Putin will defeat Ukraine and then attack NATO, so we all urgently need to arm ourselves to the teeth and take the line of restoring the number and combat readiness of European armies. As I said, the transition of the military-industrial complex of NATO countries to wartime mode has begun. So far, the outline of the formation of a European military alliance with a nuclear component has been considered. Of course, France is the first to be enthusiastic, and the same Emmanuel Macron admitted in an interview a few days ago that he is always in Paris and Berlin. Do you see Russia as the main threat? Obviously, there are fantasies about 1812 and 1941, if this threat is always seen in these capitals. Well, NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg said the alliance has been at war with our country since 2014. In the same row, the European Parliament passed a resolution in April calling for the non-recognition of Putin's legitimacy and the reduction of all contacts with him, except on humanitarian issues and the establishment of peace in Ukraine. In addition, this decision is for this decision, which, in general, forms the political and legal reality of our coexistence with the European Union, and has all reservations about the role of the European Parliament, its real role in policymaking. But 483 delegates voted for the decision. 18 abstained and 11 opposed, which were very telling. Of course, we take these figures and all other nuances into account in our practical line in the Western direction, and of course remain committed to the tasks set by the President, not only for special military operations, but also for the place Russia should and should occupy in world politics. We'll continue.
В мировой политике, которое Россия по праву должна занимать и занимает. Мы продолжим дипломатическими средствами в нашем...
In our case, through diplomatic means, we can create conditions for the West to abandon hostile policies and help achieve the stated goals of special military operations. Our diplomacy will be our top priority. But, as the President said, we are still open to dialogue with the West, including on security issues and strategic stability, but first of all, not from the standpoint of strength, not from the standpoint of our own exclusivity. Only on an equal footing, respecting each other's interests and 2 points of dialogue. In the field of stability, strategic stability, and military politics in general, there are many problems in the world today. There was noodles. However, because of the West, Americans especially like to pull out one aspect from the whole series of strategic stability issues. Now it is said that Russia refuses, so Russia is not constructive. This is the case when they have long wanted to visit our nuclear facilities again, while maintaining hostility, which is completely contrary to the principles on which the Strategic Offensive Arms Treaty is based. And there were mutual inspections, all sharp and Media is a manifestation in the field of media, and the confrontation with the West does not restrict Russia's foreign relations. Of course, in one direction, otherwise we would not be a great power. In the current situation, God Himself has ordered us to develop cooperation with the majority of the world, who are not prepared to sacrifice their relations with us, mutually beneficial relations, and relations based on historical memory for the sake of Western geopolitical adventures. In Ukraine, our relations with countries in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, the East, and Latin America in various forms remain a foreign policy priority for the global majority. We have many things that unite us, including the common image of a future multipolar world and the commitment to the basic principles of interstate communication, the most basic of which is the sovereign equality of states. President Putin visits the People's Republic of China. His one overseas visit after his re-election, his talks with President and his meetings with other representatives of Chinese leaders have confirmed that our comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction are superior in quality. Traditional interstate alliances, pastimes, and continue to play a key role in maintaining international security and balance.
И продолжают играть ключевую роль в поддержании международной безопасности и сбалансированном мировом развитии. Я читал
I read about world development.
материалы, которые
Materials prepared by some members of the SWAP, including reasoning about what is in our time.
что такое в наше время настоящее союзничество, которое будет
A real alliance that will be in Russia's interest. Of course, this topic can and should be discussed specifically, but the ideas expressed in the publications I mentioned, which are aimed at building a real alliance in the People's Republic of China, we are ready to discuss, because in the assessment given by our leaders and who.
Настоящий союз с Китайской Народной Республикой мы готовы подискутировать, потому что оценка, которую дали наши лидеры и которая гласит, что отношения
It says that the relationship is on, so close, so friendly, and in its quality surpassing alliances, the classic alliances of the past. This evaluation fully reflects the essence of the ties that exist and are being strengthened between us and the People's Republic of China in almost all fields. Ours. Actions in China and other non-Western directions have caused unconcealed evil to the former hegemon and his satellites. It is enough to look at how Sergei and his cronies are trying to prevent the world's majority countries from dealing with Russia in any way and trying to drag them into anti-Russian initiatives, such as holding the so-called Ukraine Peace Conference in Switzerland.
Проведение так называемой мирной конференции по Украине в Швейцарии. Об этом тоже, я уверен, мы сегодня более подробно поговорим.
I'm sure they're talking about it too, and we're going to talk about it in more detail today, but the goal is as simple as possible to catch up with more participants and create extras. In this context, it is declared that Zelensky's peace plan is the only solution acceptable to all, and it is already imposed on Russia in the next stage. In fact, this goal is not hidden. Zelensky, Yermak, and many representatives of the G7 countries, which are the initiators of Ukraine, have expressed this view, this very meeting.
Стран семерки, которые и являются соинициаторами с Украиной этой самой конференции. Но мы просто
But we just talked about it at the press conference in Harbin yesterday. We just watched with surprise these efforts, how, well, in general, adults are doing outright nonsense with no prospects.
Люди занимаются откровенной чепухой, у которой нет никакой перспективы. Не верю в то, что они этого не понимают.
I don't believe they don't understand this, which means that the task of achieving peace is not to confuse as many countries as possible against Russia and then try to create some further hostility on this. That is already a material step for us. All our partners in the Global South know exactly what we can talk about. We'll talk in more detail later about how the nuances are observed in the positions of some of the world's most countries. But when the West insists on planting Zelensky's formula, it is also increasing.
Когда он при этом наращивает поставки все более дальнобойных вооружений киевскому.
They are increasingly supplying the Kiev regime with long-range weapons. We take this clearly as a signal that the West is not ready for serious dialogue, which means
Они сделали выбор в пользу выяснения отношений на поле боя.
they chose to settle their relationship on the battlefield. We are ready for this, and we are ready at all times, but in any case, Russia will undoubtedly defend its interest in Ukraine and the western direction of Europe, which is understood by almost all foreign colleagues in the world. You have to communicate with them. Well, of course, I don't know what's going on in my head.
В мире практически все иностранные коллеги, с которыми приходится общаться. Ну, не знаю, конечно, что в головах у наших западных.
Our Western colleagues are surprised by some new revelations every day. Just recently, following the adoption of a Security Council resolution on a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, at least during the holy month of Ramadan.
Прекращение огня в секторе Газа хотя бы на период священного месяца Рамадан. Постоянный представитель США при ООН, госпожа
Ms. Thomas Greenfield, permanent representative of SHA Patreon, said the resolution was non-binding. I'd like to, too.
хотела бы на эту тему.
In view of the fact that the West accuses us of violating many Security Council resolutions, we will continue to work methodically and consistently to establish a new international balance, new mechanisms, and new tools that are in the interests of Russia and its partners.
Новых международных балансов, новых механизмов, новых инструментов, которые отвечают интересам России и ее партнеров, реалиям многополярного мира, о необходимости...
Realities in a multipolar world. I recently read an interview with Sergei Karaganov. He also spoke in considerable detail. We have some ideas in this regard, and we are happy to share and listen to your opinions and things.
Рады поделиться и послушать ваше мнение. И то, что, если коротко, мы все признаем, как я понимаю,
In short, as far as I know, we all recognize the complete bankruptcy of the former Euro-Atlantic security model and the bankruptcy of the Western dual containment of Russia and China. Here, Fyodor Ivanovich Lukyanov also named the line with SHA and their allies in the context of the Indo-Pacific strategy.
назвал инкарнацией НАТО в Азии, по-моему, да?
NATO incarnations were carried by my yes.
Ну и евроатлантическая безопасность.
So Euro-Atlantic security, its Euro-Atlantic model is associated with B&E, as well as relations with NATO and the European Union, including the NATO-Russia Council, including the Partnership for Peace.
Совет России и НАТО, включая партнерство ради мира. Понятно, что ничто из перечисленного, а там было огромное количество.
Obviously, none of these are listed, and there are a large number of agreements, including 4 common spaces with the European Union, much and much more. None of this is still on the agenda, all of which are overshadowed, destroyed, and torn up by the Westerners themselves.
Запад в лице НАТО начинает делать, уже сделал заявку.
The West, represented by NATO, began to apply for its leading role in the United States.
В том самом Индо-Тихоокеанском регионе, как они называют Азиатско-Тихоокеанскую
The Indo-Pacific region, as they call it, is Asian.
Азию.
Iran, mainly Southeast Asia.
О неделимости безопасности в Евроатлантике.
NATO declared the indivisibility of security in the Euro-Atlantic and Atlantic.
В этот регион внедряются
Indo-Pacific is introducing the same NATO incarnation into the region, and more attempts are being made to do so.
многочисленные попытки, создаются такие тройки, четверки, аукусы и многое другое.
3 or 4 bites and so on. So NATO failed.
НАТО, провалив, подававшую какие-то надежды, хотя бы там 30 лет назад, для каких-то
At least 30 years ago, the Euro-Atlantic security model in the west of our continent failed for some politicians, which gave some hope there. Now NATO, led by the United States, has decided to take over the east and southeast of our continent and restore order there. In this regard, of course, it is not.
Конечно же, нельзя не задумываться о том, как нам
You can't.
все-таки выстраивать
Don't think about how we can build our work on
по теме безопасности в этих условиях. Президент
On the topic of security in this context, the President in his message,
Генеральному собранию он обозначил задачу работать над темой
well, he outlined to the Federal Parliament the task of working on the topic of Eurasian security. Obviously, for us, this space is an unconditional priority, and the Commonwealth of Independent States is the core of our neighbors. We have special interests there, as do our neighbors, allies, and partners.
политических условиях потребуются дополнительные усилия.
It is clear that under the new geopolitical conditions, more efforts will be needed to unleash the potential of the Eurasian Economic Union. Its closer coordination with China's Belt and Road Initiative will inject new impetus into the work of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and develop relations with the 5 Central Asian countries, which are forming an independent integration project and a new integration project.
И к которой обращаются многие ведущие страны, включая все
Many major countries are communicating, including all major Western countries, Russia, China, and Turkey. India proposes to develop dialogue in the form of Central Asia +1.
Есть, безусловно, и ассоциации государств Юго-Востока.
Of course, there is also the South Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which has the richest history of forming philosophy, ensuring security at the level of balance of interests, and the entire architecture that has developed around ASEAN for decades and is now being attacked by the United States, Britain, the European Union.
Вокруг АСЕАН, она сейчас подвергается атаке со стороны Соединенных Штатов, Британии, Евросоюза. На смену этой архитектуре они хотят вот и привести вот те самые союзы.
So they want to replace this architecture. These are the alliances of the so-called small groups. But for us, the work in these areas is a continuation of efforts to form a large Eurasian partnership in line with the ideas formulated by President Putin at the ASEAN summit in Russia in 2015. So the Great Eurasian Partnership.
На саммите Россия-АСЕАН. Так вот, большое евразийское партнерство может стать и отношения между структурами, о которых я упомянул, эти отношения.
The relationship between the structures I mentioned may also be. These relationships have been formalized and are developing. This relationship can be the material basis for the concept of Eurasian security, which we are only obliged to consider now, and we have no right not to consider. Within the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and ASEAN, there are some plans.
Есть программы, которые так или иначе касаются военно-политической проблематики, и эта проблематика.
They involve military and political issues, which are becoming more and more important in the activities of the organization. The Collective Security Treaty also has a formal relationship with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The CIS has military and political aspects, and its program activities deal with new challenges and threats. Well, that's what thought is to think.
Ну и вот как мысль к размышлению, конечно, хочется каким-то общим зонтиком объединить вот эти евразийские.
Of course, I would like to use some kind of common umbrella to unite these Eurasian buds. And if you will, I refer to Kazakhstan's initiative in this regard to make the Conference on Interaction on Confidence-Building Measures in Asia a permanent organization. We, VKontakte, and our Kazakh friends present our assessment and express our thoughts.
Излагаем свои оценки и высказываем мысль о том, что ориентация вот этого процесса превращения совещания по мерам
The focus of this process is to turn the Conference on Confidence and Security Building Measures into an organization of focus, and its development of a Eurasian security model can at least be a very, very interesting reason for discussion. Let us not forget that the People's Republic of China once put forward the concept of ensuring global security through mouth, which
концепцию обеспечения глобальной безопасности, которая основана на логике неделимости безопасности, когда ни одна сторона
well, based on the logic of security indivisibility,
ущемления безопасности других,
when neither party should ensure its own security at the expense of the security of others.
в глобальном масштабе
And in general, this logic is replicated on a global scale. Replicating on a global scale what was recorded in 1909, 99, Istanbul, 2010, Astana, when this indivisibility of security was declared a political commitment for all of us.
политическое обязательство всех нас. Ну, вы знаете, как с этими обязательствами поступил Запад, делал все ровно таким
Well,
образом.
you know how the West has done these obligations, doing everything in a way that ignores and undermines its obligations and violates the security of the Russian Federation at every step, including trying to try us.
И в том числе пытаться настроить против нас наших же союзников. Это тоже хорошо известная линия. Но тем не менее,
It is also a well-known line to build our own allies against us. Nevertheless, President's initiative on global security was discussed during our visit to China, in meetings and within the framework of the delegation, in narrow meetings and in one-on-one talks between leaders. We see a big reason.
лидеров один на один, и мы видим большой резон в том, чтобы практическое продвижение идеи обеспечения глобальной безопасности началось.
The idea of ensuring global security has begun to be practically promoted, and the foundation of Eurasian security will begin to take shape.
Евроатлантического,
Eurasian security without anything.
конечно, евро останется.
Euro-Atlantic raid.
Атлантическое, здесь уже, в общем-то, к континенту к нашему не
Of course, the euro will remain Atlantic. In general, the continent is no longer ours. I understand what it is.
сложный вопрос. Мы понимаем о наличии
It's a very difficult question, and we understand the relationship between the United States and its European allies, its East Asian allies, and its Pacific allies. We understand the entire network of various alliances and alliances that Eurasia is almost woven from all directions with the participation of overseas and hacker gangs.
заокеанских и заламаншских представителей, но не думать о том, чтобы обеспечивать безопасность своего континента
But don't think about securing your continent on your own. I think it's wrong.
было бы неправильно.
So we want to develop these processes, try these processes. Start with a group of like-minded people.
Начать.
First of all, I mean the SKO and the other structures I listed in Eurasian space, but at the same time leave the door.
И другие перечисленные мной структуры на евразийском пространстве, но при этом оставлять дверь для подключения к этому процессу открытой для всех, без исключения стран.
This process is open to all countries and institutions on our continent without exception.
Отношение к Евразии. Это, наверное, тем более актуально, что
This may be even more important for Eurasia, as regionalization of processes at the global level is also observed in other parts of the world.
когда и отдельные страны, и их организации стремятся брать свою судьбу в свои руки и
When individual countries and their organizations strive to take their own destiny into their own hands and no longer depend on the whims of those who control all tools, all the mechanisms, the models, and systems of globalization that the United States has created.
субрегиональные структуры
We have seen such a process in Africa, where the African Union and sub-regional structures have been significantly strengthened in Latin America,
с возвращением
community of Latin American and Caribbean states.
и весьма активно работает над
With the return of Brazil, it has gained two breath and is very, very active in reducing the risks to its economic, financial, and investment projects from the disturbances observed in the global system. Well, let's not forget that these are the activations of regional life.
активизация региональной жизни, она, наверное, будет выигрывать, если гармонизировать процессы на различных континентах.
It may be beneficial to harmonize the processes of the continents, and I cannot fail to mention here the potentially very important role of the BRICS countries, which have doubled their membership and lined up to formalize relations. About 30 Russian states, with the association as chairman, have given priority to preparations for the ministerial meeting this year in Nizhny Novgorod in June and Kazan in October.
И саммита в октябре в Казани уделяем приоритетное внимание, ну, во-первых, максимально комфортной адаптации новых членов.
We prioritize the new PI as much as possible.
И вторым приоритетом
Our leaders have identified the development of criteria for the BRICS partner category as a tailor-made adaptation of new members to our common work and two priorities, which I hope will be discussed at the Kazan summit this fall. I may have misused the opportunity to make a concession, but thank you.